This seems pretty significant. I mean, you have Bezos essentially calling out Trump, who's been a very vocal critic of Amazon, and Bezos, meantime, owns the Washington Post. What do you make of this whole situation?
Well, Bezos was in D.C. It's the hometown of the Washington Post. He's got to back up his journalists and his paper, so he did that. He didn't really address the criticism of Amazon growing too big and powerful, other than to say that he didn't see it as a significant threat, that no matter what new regulations are imposed, customers are always going to want low prices, fast delivery, and vast selection. So there has been this funny relationship between Bezos and Trump. The pattern seems to be that Trump attacks Amazon when he feels attacked by the Washington Post. And so what we saw here was that Bezos feels an obligation to defend his journalists at the Washington Post, but he doesn't really feel a need to engage on the bigger picture of what government can do to Amazon.
Right, Naomi, this comes at a time when he's facing growing political backlash from the left and the right. I want to take a quick listen at what he said about this during his talk there.
It's really important that politicians and others they need to understand the value that big companies bring and not demonize or vilify business in general, or especially not business. Well, they shouldn't vilify big companies and they shouldn't vilify business in general, for sure.
Naomi, you have Trump criticizing Amazon on one hand, Bernie Sanders on the other. I mean, how does the scrutiny that Amazon faced really different from his other tech giant peers?
Well, a lot of the backlash that other tech companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitter have faced recently from politicians on both sides of the aisles, questions about whether they're being biased against conservative voices, questions about how Russians were able to use social media giants to influence the 26th presidential election. Amazon has managed to avoid. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people in Washington asking questions about whether Amazon is getting a little bit too big. And so it's not that there's not danger for Amazon and Jeff Bezos in Washington, but a lot of the brunt of the public criticism that tech companies have faced and have gotten a lot of media attention have been focused elsewhere in the industry.
Right, and Spencer, at that event, Bezos also sketched out his philanthropic visions, and up until now, he's been pretty invisible when it comes to that. So why did he choose now to outline his broad ambitions here?
Well, he's in his 50s. He's the world's wealthiest man, and you can only be the world's wealthiest man for so long, without being a big donor to some causes, without being called a hoarder. So it's his time. He's if you look at the trajectory of Bill Gates, there's a time where he's very focused on growing Microsoft, and then later he became more philanthropic. And so now this is Bezos' time to become more philanthropic. And remember, a year ago, he tweeted out kind of a crowdsourcing plea, help me give this wealth away. And they received 47,000 some odd responses. Last night, he said that homelessness and education were two things that emerged as things that are very important to people. And he's also feels that early intervention in child education, getting a kid on a good path to education early, is the best step rather than trying to intervene later and get them caught up. And then with homelessness, it just looks like they're going to try to support existing shelters that are making a difference, that have a track record of success, and throw more resources out them so that they can, get a multiplier on the programs that they're having that are working.
His pledge to help homeless families, though, Spencer, comes at a weird time. It comes just months after he helped overturn a proposed tax in Seattle that would have brought a lot of funding to the homeless situation in Seattle. So why is this happening?
Yeah, so Amazon fought very aggressively against a tax in Seattle that would have generated, I think, about $50 million a year for programs for the homeless and to create affordable housing. Amazon fought that. It was a tax on big employers, and Amazon would have been the primary target of that tax, and they didn't like it. What this shows is that Bezos is fine, supporting the homeless as long as it's on his terms and not on government's terms. He's more comfortable doing it philanthropically than he is just having his wealth taken and the government deciding how it should be spent.
And Naomi, we're months ahead of the midterms, and Bezos has made a big political foray with this $10 million donation into the super PAC called the With Honor Fund. What do we know about this super PAC?
So this is a PAC that's dedicated to putting more veterans in Congress who are dedicated to working across the aisle and to get things done in Washington. So the candidates they support have to take a pledge to not only meet with a member of the opposing party regularly, but also sponsor legislation. And the whole goal is really a tall task here in Washington. It's to increase civility and bipartisanship.
And Spencer, the affordable housing shortage is very acute in places like Seattle and where I am now in San Francisco, where the tech boom has helped fuel these rising costs of housing. Does Bezos' investment in this area even put a dent on the situation?
Not really. I mean, and especially with him saying that this money's predominantly going to go to homeless shelters, that's the symptom of the affordable housing crisis, right? That's not the solution. The solution is more affordable housing, not more shelters. And when you speak with experts on homelessness, shelters are actually quite expensive. And it's a much more cost-effective way to address the affordable housing crisis, to create more affordable housing and to intervene before people go homeless. And one example of that is like preventing evictions and that sort of things, those things that lead to this, catastrophic situation where people don't have a roof over their head. So you can intervene earlier and prevent them from being homeless. That's a more cost-effective solution. But Bezos is putting the Band-Aid on the symptom with homeless shelters.